Follow along as I go through this glute workout today using just your body and your mat. Coming to a kneeling position, align your shoulders over your wrists and your hips over your knees, maintaining a neutral spine position. Next, we'll be lifting the knee up parallel to the hip bone, maintaining that neutral spine, pulling that core tight as you begin to poke up toward the ceiling. To engage the core, pretend someone's holding a candle underneath your belly button and you're pulling away from the flame. Engage your center glute and squeeze as you lift and poke. I prefer a pointed toe. You can also flex the heel instead. Next, bend and lengthen that leg at the knee joint, trying to maintain that same tight squeeze through the glute, working the knee joint, almost like you're doing a hamstring curl. Try to activate glute into hamstring. Begin to pulse that straight leg up behind you. Again, we're keeping those hips parallel to the floor to maintain a neutral spine and to engage those glutes. We're now going to come onto our hips, bending the elbow and placing the ear in the triangle that's made from the shoulder, elbow, and palm. With a straight leg, begin to lower and lift that top leg. Squeezing the glutes, we still want to maintain a neutral pelvic position so the hips don't fall forward or back. Rib cage together. Do not dump the weight into the ribs. Begin to sweep the foot forward and back. Can you point the toes forward and flex the heels back? Try to stay in line with your hip bone. Tap the floor, lift back up parallel to the hip bone. Try to keep everything aligned without rolling the hips or engaging your lower back. Think about pulling the ribs together and driving your belly button back to spine with a proud open chest and collarbone. Holding that foot forward, bring it back parallel to the hip. Begin to draw tiny circles. Pretend there's a marker attached to your toe. Draw a circle on the wall or the surface closest to your toe. If your hips begin to roll forward and back in such a way where your spine is moving, try limiting that range of motion. We've now reversed the circle here, getting that other direction. One direction is going to be external rotation, while the other is internal rotation. External is away from your midline. Internal would be toward. Lower down the knee and come on up onto your hip. I want both knees pointing the same direction, both feet pointing the opposite direction in a Z-sit. I'm down on my forearm with a hand on the hip. I hover my knee up parallel to the hip for a pulse. In this position, I'm careful not to dump the weight in my ribs, and I just want to keep that hip level with the knee. I don't want to come too far below, and I want to hold my hip so that I don't let that knee come in front of the hip. Straightening that leg. You may have to come a little lower in position to pulse up that leg. Again, I don't want to dump the weight in my rib cage. I want to instead lift and squeeze the top glute, bringing the weight into that top glute as I pulse, not engaging the back. Not engaging too much through those hip flexor muscles, instead squeezing the center glute behind me. Tap the floor, lift back up to hip level, work that lower range of motion here. Now laying on my back in the supine position, find neutral, straighten both legs. Find a position where you can maintain neutral, press the heels down and flex the feet. Hips are level with one another. And I want to find a strong sense of center. Imagine a straight line from crown of head to tailbone. Take the right foot, begin to point the toe to lift up off the floor. Flex the heel to come back down. Connect to that hip while maintaining a stable hip on your left side. I'm going to begin to cross toward the left side, back to the right. Try to keep that right hip stable in the same spot as you cross over. Once I begin to roll the right hip, my range of motion is just a little bit too far. We're working toward an exercise called single leg circles here. I lift up, cross toward the opposite thigh, come back to parallel hip position, and rise back up. So it's almost like a half circle. Straight up parallel to the hip. Squeeze the thighs as you cross the midline. Come to the bottom, back to parallel, and up. Really work on that hip control here. Not just through the right side, but the left as well. Both hips remain stable. Reverse those circles, going the other way. Squeeze the glute on the left side as you're grounding yourself. Bring it down, switch sides, lower and lift on that left side, really getting a strong sense of where that hip is on the left. So when we do get to the single leg circle, we know where to stop to lift back up after we cross over. Everything will be the same. As you go through this side, always focus on stable hips, stable spine, not engaging your lower back, and not letting those hips roll. Now I'm crossing over and then coming back to that center position, parallel to the left hip. Circle across, down, and up. If you look closely, I am actually rotating just a little bit as I circle. I placed my left hand on my left hip to help to control that. So sometimes just self-correcting by placing your fingertips on the moving part will help stabilize. Reverse those circles. Bringing that leg down to rest, bend both knees, glue the soles of your feet together, let your hips rest in that butterfly position, and breathe. Finishing up that deepest breath, we'll next be coming to a kneeling position to get into that other side, our right side, or whatever side you haven't done already. We'll be getting that knee up parallel to the hip next to go into that ceiling poke. Finding that nice neutral position. Take a second to find it, just like I did there, and begin to poke up, squeezing the glute, connecting to the hamstring, the neutral spine, and engaging the core. Remember, it's just like someone took a candle under your belly button and you're pulling from the flame while still squeezing your rib cage together. This will be followed by that bend and extend and that straight leg lift. Think of your ribs as an elevator door. You want to close that elevator door, particularly on your exhale. As I pulse up, I really lift and squeeze through my center glute. When you squeeze your butt cheeks together, for lack of a better term, it alleviates tailbone pressure and it helps to protect that lower back. Very important to engage those center glutes. Bringing it down, we come onto our hip and we're going to do the same sequence here. First things first, find your alignment, begin to pulse up here. Work on controlling that top hip. Don't let it roll forward or back, maintaining a neutral pelvic position. Open the collarbone, don't collapse the shoulders, don't engage your back, and also be mindful not to let that weight dump into the rib cage. As I bring my foot forward and back in a sweep, I point to come forward, I flex to come back. If you're going behind the hip, that's fine, but not more than 2 to 3 inches, and not if it's going to hyperextend your lower back. As you tap the floor and lift back up hip height, again, you would just want to make sure you're not letting your hips roll forward and you're not moving that spine around or swaying your back. Coming onto that forearm, here we are again, getting into that hydrant lift. Just a nice reminder, I want to keep my hip and my knee parallel. There's a nice straight line from knee to hip that I don't go past. Sometimes it's nice to just use your hand as a guide so you don't accidentally bring that knee too far forward. What we're working toward is that gluteus medius, that outer glute muscle. Its big job is to stabilize hips and pelvis, so it's actually really important. It's kind of the outer part of your glute, but you're still squeezing the center glute here as well. Just a reminder, don't dump all the weight in the ribs on the bottom, nor onto that forearm and shoulder. Instead, squeeze that top glute a little bit harder. Coming to a prone position, I lay on my stomach, pressing my pubic bone down, squeezing my glutes at the same time, and then I'm going to lift my legs up off the mat. I want to pull my belly button away from the mat as well, so I'm not just laying all my body weight down, I'm using it to squeeze my glutes. I begin to kick my legs, keeping them straight. We call this swimming. It does put your lower back in a slight extension of the spine. Again, squeezing your glutes together will help to alleviate that tailbone pressure. The harder you squeeze your glutes, the more they're engaged. Next up, I bend both knees, bringing my heels together, toes apart, knees wide in a frog stamp. I'm in a Pilates V with my feet, knees slightly wider than hips, pressing the pubic bone down and squeezing the glutes as I lift and lower up off the mat, really getting into my glutes. Always be mindful of your lower back. It does help to pull those ribs together a little bit deeper and pull the navel, the belly button, away from the mat at the same time. Just a few more here. You're doing a great job if you're going along with me. And we come on up to all fours, going into cat-cow. Release the spine a couple times.